The gospel for today may be found on page 1185 in your Bible. Page 1185 is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, beginning with verse 1, page 1185. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed by their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages, teaching. The Gospel of the Lord. Thank you, Sister T. It's just a few allergies that accumulate on my vocal cords. I got to wash them away. Okay. I think that's better. Excuse me. Okay. Well, today we heard about Ezekiel being called to be a prophet. And then we heard Jesus speaking of himself as a prophet. So what is a prophet? I think nobody in the right mind would want to be a prophet. Prophets had a really tough job. Their job description was twofold. One, the easy part was when times were bad for their people, they would remind them that God was still with them, things would improve. Well, that was nice, but nobody believed that because they didn't improve instantly. It took years often. And so that was not very fulfilling. The other part of their job description is that they had to speak the truth to power. And the powers were the leaders. The powers were the people that could retaliate. And so when they told the powers, the leaders of the people, scribes, high priests, kings, that they were doing wrong, that they were sinning, they were leading their people into sin, they were allowing the people to sin, they didn't want to hear that. So they often got back by putting them down, by torturing them, sometimes even by killing them. The prophet job was not a good one. No one was lined up to get this job. It's very, very difficult. But Ezekiel said okay. Jesus obviously said okay. Now, in Jesus' case, he was rejected not by the leaders in this case. Later on, he would certainly be. But in this case, it was by his own townspeople. He was in Nazareth. And those people had known him from the time he was born, at least the time he got back to Nazareth. They knew him as a kid growing up. They saw him running through the streets with droopy diapers. They saw him working in the shop with his father, the carpenter. They saw him doing all kinds of normal things in the town till he was 30 years old. And so they said, "What? What's happened now?" He's acting differently. And in their culture, that was not allowed. In our culture, if you get ahead, that's nice. But in Jesus' culture, if you got ahead, something was wrong. You were cheating somewhere. You weren't following the rules. And so they couldn't believe in him. So it was a tough job. Now, the interesting part is that we are all called to be prophets. Sorry about that. Each one of us at our baptism is called to be a prophet. Next time you're at a baptism, listen carefully. After the baptism, we come back up here, and the priest anoints the person baptized with chrism, with a special oil. And in that prayer, it says you're called to be a prophet. So anybody here who's baptized is called to be a prophet, to speak the truth to power. And we feel, what? I can't do that. What am I supposed to do? It's like, we're not called to be major prophets. We're not called to be like Ezekiel or Isaiah or Jeremiah or Amos or any of those big guys. But we're called to speak the truth to power on occasion when it needs to be done. Sometimes we have to hold our leaders accountable. And that is very difficult, but required. Let me tell you a little story. Anybody ever hear there's a movie called Johnny Lingo? Very short movie, less than 30 minutes. You can Google it, see the whole thing right there. Johnny Lingo. Johnny lived in the Polynesian Islands, excuse me. And Johnny was a tradesman. He had a boat, and he would sail between the islands and trade. And they didn't use money in those days. They traded for goods, back and forth. Johnny Lingo was very successful. Johnny Lingo was very confident. Johnny Lingo was handsome. Johnny Lingo was well put together. Johnny Lingo was honest. Johnny Lingo was friendly. Everybody liked Johnny Lingo. Well, at one point, Johnny decides it's time to take a wife. And he had had his eyes on a young lady by the name of Mahana. Mahana lived in a little village with her father. And Mahana was not the person you would have expected Johnny to pick. Mahana was kind of at the bottom of the heap. Mahana was the oldest lady in the village who had never been chosen to be a wife. Mahana was very, very, extremely, painfully shy. She walked around kind of bent over, her head facing the ground. She hardly ever said anything to anybody. You hardly ever even saw her. And so people thought she was rather homely. Some even said she was ugly. And so something strange was going on here. Well, in those days, you paid a dowry to the father of the bride. And the dowry was paid not in money, but in this village, it was paid in cows. C-O-W-S, cows, moo cows. And so the father thought, I'll be lucky to get one cow for Mahana. In fact, I may even have to pay a cow to take her. They sat down, or they were about to sit down, and Mahana's father had an advisor. He said, ask for 3 cows. The father said, oh, he'll never pay 3 cows. Ask for 3 cows, and you get him down to 1, you're well off, and everything's done. And you move Mahana on. Good. And everybody, as they sat down on the ground and faced one another to begin the negotiations, the village gathered around to listen to what was going on. There's a scene where a couple of ladies are talking to one another. It says, my husband paid 3 cows for me. And her friend says, I was a 4-cow wife. So, anyhow, they sit down, and Mahana's father says, I would like 3 cows for Mahana. Johnny says, oh, 3 cows? I can't pay you 3 cows for Mahana. That's ridiculous. I will give you 8 cows. Took people's breath away. They didn't know what to say. 8 cows for Mahana? 8 cows. Well, the father took that, and that was that, and they were married that night. And then they went off on a trip, business trip. They were gone a long time. When they came back, nobody recognized Mahana. She was a changed lady. She stood up straight. She had a smile on her face. She looked beautiful. She was confident. She realized that she was loved. She came out of her shell. Johnny had released her from her prison. She was a new woman. She was truly a 8-cow bride. Now, Jesus looks at each one of us and sees the value in us and says, you are my 8-cow people. Each of you is an 8-cow person. Each of you can do whatever I ask you to do. You just have to believe. And so he asks us to be prophets sometimes, to speak his word to power. Now, we probably do that in little ways. We do it in our congregations here by being part of CAGE, Congregations Acting for Justice and Empowerment. We act for justice in kind of small ways, careful ways. But who are the other prophets around us? Do we have prophets nowadays in our land? What about the people who say to the immigration services that you can't separate kids from their parents? They're speaking truth to power. That's not a political message. That's a moral message. That's a message of justice. If you look around, you will see lots of prophets here and there who speak truth to power. It's uncomfortable. People disagree. But if we are discerning, we can see that there are prophets in our land. Sometimes we are called to be prophets. Let's just take a few moments to think about this job that God has given us and ask ourselves, what do you expect of me? You have empowered me. You love me. You think I'm an 8-cow person. How can I serve you as a prophet?